So when a computer is like generating a response, it's really looking at like mathematical equations and how like close these things are relative to one another in the context that it's provided.
That makes it so much messier to imagine.
I think the biggest hangups are like the two things are people don't understand what these models do. And so people are like, oh, it's, it's magic or it's genius or it's thinking like us. And it's like, no, it's like, it's doing what computers are good at. It's doing mathematics, it's doing computations, it's doing them incredibly fast.
What is AI? Hey, I'm Jordan, and this is the Bible and Archaeology podcast, the place for conversations and questions about the lands, civilizations, and archaeology of the Bible. This week, we are doing something a little bit different. We're talking about AI. The reason we're talking about AI is because it is everywhere, and it's in a number of recent news stories and journal articles looking at things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and trying to date Dead Sea Scrolls or trying to translate ancient texts. AI is making its way into all kinds of academic fields. And as we've looked at these articles and news stories and tried to talk about them with you, we've realized there's large areas of AI that simply don't make sense to us. So I reached out to a friend, Matthew Cunningham, founder of Compliant and someone who worked with OpenAI, and asked him to come on and explain AI to me and hopefully help explain AI to you. How does it think? What does it do? What can't it do? What are areas of concern and what are areas of optimism? If you have questions about AI, I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Remember, for early access to ad-free video podcasts and exclusive content, like a weekly bonus podcast walking through every chapter of the Bible, we just started Exodus. If you're interested, you can join us over on Patreon. We are Bible and Arc on Patreon. But for now, settle in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation all about AI. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today about a topic that I know absolutely nothing about, AI, one of these terms that's everywhere. So thank you for coming in to unpack this concept in part for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to join you.
Can you set up the story a little bit for us? Because I think people are probably coming in. Normally, we don't do AI stuff. And so in some parts, the audience might be like, well, why are you guys doing AI? We're covering AI because there's AI stories everywhere related to everything. And so we've been talking about some stories where AI is being used to help translate things, help translate texts in different ways. But as we have talked about those, I have realized just how little I understand about what AI is. And so I thought, well, I have a friend who knows a lot more about AI than I do. And so you are happily here. All that to say, how did you come to be a part of the AI sphere that's going to take over the world, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined OpenAI in uh, 2023, I believe, and joined their security team. And so when I started, my job was in like the cybersecurity compliance side of the house. It's really like, hey, now that ChatGPT exists and they're trying to sell that to businesses, how do we make sure that businesses want to do business with us? How do we get our security practices in order? All that kind of stuff. And so that was really my entry into the world of AI. I didn't really know much about it at that point. And so in order to secure it and in order to get businesses, comfortable with the technology that we're working with, I really had to dive in and sort of understand what the underlying technology is so that I can, assure other businesses that, they're comfortable sending their data to OpenAI, and they're comfortable, trusting us with their information.
And the comfort question, I will come back to at the end, because I do think that's one of the looming things in most everybody's mind all the time when we type anything into ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever the AI companion of the moment might be. But can I maybe take even one step further back? When we talk about AI, what are we talking about, or what are you talking about when you see that term? Because it's one of these things that's in every headline. It's all over the place. But because we talk about it so much, it feels like a thing that means everything and nothing at the same time. that we all just smile and nod like I know what this means and I have no idea what this means. So for you, how do you explain when someone hears your job and they're like, "Oh, you work with AI?" Like how do you describe what that is?
Yeah, so fundamentally, these big AI model developers, there's a number of different technologies, but the one that most of us are probably most familiar with is you send, text input into a model and you get, a text response back. And so that might be, asking the model questions. So you might ask ChatGPT like, hey, what are the best movies that I could go watch that are similar to these other movies that I like, or hey, send an email to this person and make it a little bit more like punchy, or make it a little bit more more friendly than my like brain dump might look like. And so under the hood, these AI models are really just like text predictors, or like a probability model. And
Okay.
so really what's happening is they are predicting like word by word, or like context by context, like what the next sequence in the response are going to be. So if you think of something like as basic as like the Lord of the, like, what would you guess the next word is going
I
to
would go
be?
rings. Lord of the Rings would be
Right.
mine.
Right, exactly. So like the probability that Lord of the Rings is going to be, or rings is going to be like the end of that sentence, is like highly probable because you know like the context leading up to it, right? But if I said the Lord as the start, it could be the Lord of the Rings, the Lord is our shepherd, the Lord is great, like whatever it happens to
Hmm.
be, right? And so basically, uh, you take information from across the entire internet, text from the entire internet, and then you're training a model that like, hey, based on the context that you're looking at, like here are the sequence of things that are likely to come after one another. And if you do that over a large enough data set, then you get like these extremely complex like relationships between words, that allow you to do, text generation.
Yeah.
And so, like, originally, when it started out and they were doing like translate, like language translation, right? The models were pretty bad because what it was doing is it was taking word for word and it was saying, okay, what is the in Spanish? And what is uh, I in Spanish? And what is like in Spanish? And what is burrito, or whatever it happens to be. But over time, what they did is they, instead of looking at it word by word, you can also get context from, a sentence. So then if you're translating to another language, or if you're, generating a response to a question, you're able to just take more than just a word itself as context. You're able to look at like, the parts of speech and what does, like the Lord of the, but the Lord of the Rings combined has
Hmm.
like a meaning that like the individual words underneath it don't have. Um, and so that's really what AI is at its heart. Is it's really like these complex, they call them model weights, but it's like a weight between, um, how much weight you're going to give these different paths that a model could use to generate text. Um, and so
So
like
it's
you could,
it's it's doing like
yeah,
a lot less. I don't know. When I think of it, it feels like it's always being described as it's thinking, but it's predicting. I guess is a style of thinking. Like if I can predict what you're going to do, I had to put some thought into that. But when it's weighing things out, that's what it is using to make these. Not like it's having its own thought to decide. I think you're most likely to say this. It's looking at the numbers as a computer to say you're most likely to pick this one.
totally, right? Because computers don't understand like natural language. So like so it actually gets like one level deeper where it's not even looking at words. Basically what they do is they run words, or like a series of words or sentences, through a mathematical model and generate a vector space, which is basically a set of numbers that represent that word or that context of words. So when a computer is like generating a response, It's really looking at like mathematical equations and how like close these things are relative to one another in the context that it's provided. And then
That makes
like
it so much messier to imagine.
it's crazy, right? And so like you can think of that as like the absolute foundation, right? So you take natural human language and you codify it into these mathematical vector spaces, and that's like the foundation. So that's what the model's like looking at the base level. And then it's like, okay, take in words or a combination of words and how those things relate to each other. That's like the next level so that it can do predictive, analytics basically on what the next sequence in the event is likely to come. And then when you hear about like, oh, the model's thinking, there's this concept called chain of thought. And basically what that's doing is instead of having to provide like extremely specific steps that a model is going to take, the model first like attempts to predict what steps it needs to do in order to accomplish the task that you've provided. And then for each one of those steps, it goes through and, predicts what the series of, like responses are going to be, and then feeds that into the next section so that it's like, running through iterations of its own cycle. So a model thinking, like it's not thinking in the same way that we perceive
Right.
thinking as humans. It's more of, like the things that computers are really good at, which is lots of iterations, lots of computations, that kind of thinking.
Yeah, it's not like, let me sit back in my chair and mull on this for a second and prepare you an answer. It's doing complicated math to give me back something that it's feeding me in the language that I gave it. Okay.
Exactly.
I guess that makes more sense and even less sense at the same time
Yes.
than,
Yeah.
than just, if I open up chat and tell it something. Now I'm going to be imagining it like going into vector spaces. That just makes it so much harder. I guess if I can ask another maybe complicating question in this, you've put chat here as like one, I think the one that most people probably engage with most frequently is the kind of like text input and text response, or image generation. Maybe people have used those too. But there are these other
Absolutely.
terms that get thrown around, like we have the large language models, but there's also like the machine learning and deep learning and neural networks and all these different types of terms that get tagged on depending on the news story. Are they all kind of working? Should we think of them as working in the same way, or are there significant differences in the way they work and the kind of things they can do depending on the classification that they are?
Yeah, so I would say that like learning is like a pretty broad field, and there's a lot that encompasses that. And then AI and large language models and like the underlying technology transformers is like a subset of like this bigger field of machine learning. So machine learning is just trying to get like a machine to be able to take steps that, like you don't have to explicitly call out. It can kind of like assume the next step. Like you're trying to get the machine to learn essentially where it can perform a behavior. So like text classification and like the technologies that have been out for like the past 5 or 10 years, like spam filtering and emails. Like these are all like applications of machine learning. And then like large language models uh and AI is really more of like the advancements that have been made in the past couple years with some of the more recent companies that we're seeing today. So it's more
Okay.
of like a specialization in a broader ecosystem of
So
study.
think of it as that machine learning is the bigger umbrella under which this is kind of the current poster child maybe of success and engagement
Exactly.
is those AI models. You were
Yes.
talking about the amount of data, I guess going down that like predictive chain. The more it can scrape across, the better it can be at predicting these kinds of things. In the context of that, how much data does it need to have in order to really be able to do something well? Because we've talked about there's been some news stories lately where scholars gather together like fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls and teach a model to identify specific characters off of this data set of 20 or 40 scroll fragments, and then say, okay, can you use this with dates we've given you to help do something else? But they put in the disclaimer, this is a small data set and we would need more. What does more really look like to make something really robust? Like, does it need the whole internet, or is that just what AI has available to it and it could actually work on a lot less?
Totally. So I guess there's like two potential directions for that answer. One is if you kind of have to think about it as like context that you know about. So if you know absolutely nothing and all you're given is like ancient Dead Sea Scroll text translated to like their English equivalent, that's like the only knowledge that you have, right? And so you could do very little with that information.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trained on the entire internet and then you like fine tune it or say like, hey, I have a specific use case where I have these, 40 Dead Sea Scrolls that I want to like add to your knowledge base, and I want you to focus your answers on the output of this, or I want you to, learn to specialize in the translation of this. Then it's able to pull on the context from, translating to other languages, and it's able to pull on the context of like all the relationships between the English language, that when you provide that additional information, these additional, you know, uh, documents or text to it, it's able to like build more complicated relationships with all of that information.
Okay.
So if you're going to start from scratch, you need a ton of information. If you're starting from a foundation with, a model that already exists that's been trained on the internet, then, you can get away with, not very much information at all.
Okay.
Like, it really depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to piece together an ancient language that, nobody has understood for a long time, then it depends on the depth of that language, right? Like if they only have you know, thousands of words and to come up with all the concepts that they use to define things, that could be relatively easy. Maybe you only need like a subset of that and you can get, 80% of the way. Um, if it's a much more complex language, then, you know, you need as much of it as you can in order to be able to build that, um, that probability of like, hey, depending on this word, this is likely the next thing to come up, or based on these symbols, this has a conceptual meaning that one of these symbols by itself doesn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the more examples that you have of that, the more combinations, the more unique, uh, combinations of things, the better response that you'll get. So the more
In
information is always better, I guess.
the more the better. Is that also a place though where like the concern about bias comes in, where some of these academics talk about, well, we're going to build our own model from scratch and give it a very small data set because we're concerned about biases from previous studies or biases in the internet. Is there a way that it can be trained, I guess, to try to balance those? And because if it's scraping from the whole internet, will it just date things the way that everyone has always done it? Is it able to argue against that?
Totally. So that's one of the hardest things with AI models, right? Is because they're basically predictive generators, they're going to most of the time go with whatever there's the most information on, right?
Okay.
So if there is a lot of context on the internet that says this is the way things are, then it's going to think that that is the most probable response that you want. So you can fine tune a model and specifically, provide it with basically examples of questions that you might see, and then redirect its answer to something else and say, this is a good answer. Or provide a question that you might ask and a question that it's likely to respond with and say, this is a bad answer.
Okay.
So that's called like reinforcement learning with human feedback, where you're basically trying to, tell the model what a good response is and what a bad response is. But the problem is that's a difficult thing to do, because when you're dealing with broad concepts, um, you know, the model is going to revert to the most probable outcome. So you're basically trying to capture as many use cases as you can
Hmm.
to revert it to your desired outcome. So
And then
starting from scratch in some
is
cases might be the best.
is best. But then you're
Yeah.
also starving it. So like by starving
You're
it, you
also
can help
starving it,
prevent
yes.
bias, but then it may not have enough. But if you give it everything, then it might just give you everything that it already knows, which you're like, I don't want. That's okay.
It's
It's been one
complicated,
of my,
right? So like,
yeah, it's been one of the
yeah,
questions about these kinds of studies is like, well, how much data is enough data and what is not enough? And a lot of the questions from like scholars is, well, we don't really know about AI to know how much data it needs to know. And so is it enough to have 60 examples or does it need 6,000 examples? And should it be hands off? Like, don't give it reinforcement and just let it tell you things so that it doesn't just give you what you want, but it might need
right.
you to tell it what it should or shouldn't do so it has an answer. It's a
Exactly.
quandary.
Yeah, it's super complicated, right? So like companies have been trying to deal with this like in the political space as an example, right? And so if you look on the internet for something like Donald Trump, the majority of news outlets are, have unfavorable opinions of Donald Trump. So if you ask an AI model that hasn't been fine-tuned, it'll basically say, like he's a terrible guy. He's like all of these things because that's the majority of what's been published on the internet from, the major news publications, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what, AI companies are doing is they're saying, we can't get away from that. We can't get away from that's the majority of training. So what we're going to do is if you ask about a political figure, we'll give you, pros and we'll give you cons and we'll say ultimately, it's up to you. And
Okay.
so like they can't get away from saying like they can't get away from the underlying bias, but what they can do is they can change how the model responds. So then instead of giving only negative bias or only the prevailing underlying bias, they're able to provide, insight into both categories, which is easier for the model to do because then it can do, sentiment analysis and say, hey, this is positive sentiment, this is negative sentiment. I have to give equal of both, right? And then that
Mm-hmm.
becomes like a math problem versus trying to get it to understand the nuance of a political persona and what's accurate and what's not accurate and all that kind of stuff.
Because when it's
So
thinking through those kinds of descriptions, it's just looking at is it understanding, I guess, as it's doing this predictive analysis in what I'm asking it and then in preparing its answer. As it analyzes, here's 50 articles on a thing, is it trying to vet them or does it just go through and say 40 of these agree and so there you go, that's a majority position from the set that I had.
yeah, I mean that's essentially how it works, right? Like
Okay.
under the hood, it's not vetting anything. It's just taking, like say you gave me 50 research papers on a topic. And I basically went through and I did word association or like sentence context association. And the topic was, AI. And I was like, AI can be incredibly dangerous. AI is going to take over humanity. AI is blah, 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 right? My association with AI is going to be a lot of negative sentiment. So then when I ask that AI model something about AI, the sentiment is going to be negative because it associates that with, what it has in its knowledge base,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus if the vast majority of data in its training set was positive sentiment, it's more likely to have a positive response because that's the most logical path for it to take.
So then the biases can both be, I guess, introduced by the human who's helping to train it, or by the internet and the data set, or potentially by both if you are limiting its data set to bias it one way and it's all going. So there's many ways, I guess, for bias to enter the feed of the AI.
Absolutely. And it's very hard to, I would say the underlying data set is the most important piece. It's very hard
Okay.
to overwrite that. You can override that with enough examples, to the contrary. Um, and you can override that by, trying to change how the model responds, like not just giving the, most likely response, but giving, positive and negative responses or something like that. Um, but generally, yeah, the underlying data is one of the most important pieces.
And is that where something like employing good reinforcement learning can really make a difference on maximizing the value out of a data set? Or will that good data set provide good results even if you're not engaging in that kind of training? If they're saying like, well, we don't want to meddle with it, we don't want to push it, so we're just going to give it the data, will it still be better?
Uh, yes and no. So yes, it will still be better if you give it a good underlying data set, but also the reinforcement learning. So like a lot of the benefit of reinforcement learning is like tuning how the model responds to something.
Okay.
So, um, like given the underlying text, it'll give you a response. But then if you want to change the, you know, how long or short the response is, like post training is good for that. Or if you want it to be more academic in nature and response versus, um, more of like a friendly companion response, right? Like there's almost like different purposes of like the underlying data set that you give it and then the reinforcement learning.
Does
Both can be used for the same underlying purpose, but they also have like different benefits or different things that they're good at.
does it change if you move away from like if you shift away from getting a text response back and saying, write this thing for me and instead ask it to do like identification, like point out and just identify it this or this. Does that significantly change the approach that the data set or the training has, or is it still largely thinking about all of this the same? It's just providing it to us in a way that we understand it differently, but it understands it in the same way.
Yeah, good question. I think, I mean, I under the hood, it's just doing like basic mathematical probabilities, right? So if you ask it to do like a sentence response structure, it's going to take, the and then append that to your question, and that's like the start of the answer, and then it's like answer and then the answer and blah blah blah, and it's going to continue building on that. If you just ask for like bullet points, it'll do the same thing, but maybe you'll get more. I don't know, like the underlying process is the same, but I guess it's just like more dense information,
The
maybe.
output, yeah, because it feels like one of
Yeah,
those things
yeah,
where the output can look so different to us that the assumption might be, well, it's working through this question differently or it's building a different process because this one gave me a full paper and this one it just gave me 5 dates and they're just bullet points with a thing. And so it must have
right.
thought about it differently because I think maybe the bias being like, well, I would have had to think about it differently. So this thing had to think about it differently. But its process of doing its vector space and all of those madness things are kind of the same. The outputs just changed for our
Exactly.
request. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, it is there a common like misconception, and maybe we've already hit on it, but like within these things, when people are like me struggling to understand how this works, is there one of these like underlying issues that feels like the one people need to understand most in order to help resolve a lot of down the road questions that come up because they failed this like foundational understanding aspect?
I think it really just depends on the context. Like in a business setting, like the biggest hang up that people have is like, what do I do? Like, what does the company do with my data, right? When I like send it a question or something like that,
Right.
right? So for most businesses, like the models don't do anything with the data. Like you send the information to a model, it does predictive analytics, it generates the response, like your input and response aren't saved. Um, but like what is useful is like that reinforcement learning or those examples of, successful questions and responses and like how you want the model to answer, and like people's negative sentiment towards, certain responses. If people, allow the company to take that kind of stuff, then what they do is they use that, feedback in order to, provide those as examples for training future models, right?
Okay.
Um,
So
so
that's
I
like the
would
question
say,
after it gives me a response where it's like, did this satisfy your request? Like that's the one that it can use to help better understand its own processes.
right, exactly.
Okay.
And so like the company's not, like, I think that people think like, oh, are they going to be like looking at my data? Like nobody's looking at your data. It's going as like a feedback loop into the system so that it learns from, interactions, and it's like, hey, that was a good response, or, like that wasn't a good response. Or, like now the models are kind of tuned to, it'll give you something, it'll say, hey, maybe you want to follow up with this, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's all based on, feedback and like questions that people ask in response to other questions. And, like getting that feedback loop of like not just providing you with, the answer, but also providing you with like what the next logical follow-up things are. Um, so I would say like the biggest hang up, I think the biggest hang-ups are like the two things are people don't understand what these models do, and so people are like, "Oh, it's magic, or it's genius, or it's thinking like us." And it's like, no, it's like it's doing what computers are good at. It's doing mathematics, it's doing computations, it's doing them incredibly fast. Like that's why all these companies are investing in hardware and data centers. It's huge compute costs. Like you need massive amounts of compute in order for these, computers to be able to these, uh, crunch this data basically and
Mm-hmm.
perform these computations. And then like the output, they call them model weights. It's literally like that mathematical formula that it's like, hey, you given this input here, break these things down into, vectors or mathematical equations, and then you're able to compute, the
Mm-hmm.
outputs based on that. So I think those two things are the biggest hangups. Like, what are AI models? Like, how do they work? Um, and then like what happens when I send it my information? Like, does a company look at it? Like, what are they doing? Are they stealing my,
Are they
my
stealing my
my
stuff?
sensitive
Yeah.
information? It's like,
My
yeah,
well, my information,
the
or
answer is no.
I know one of the concerns from, I mean, there's all kinds of like academic concerns where people are, in classes, like how does AI get used in students and those things. But I know there's also concerns from academics of, well, if I'm having it review a paper, and AI is also stuff like spell check in Word and Grammarly, like those things are engaged
Totally,
in the same stuff. And so if I have those, like, is it going to be able to take my intellectual work, my property, and become like a version of me that does my work before I can do it? And then does it get to have it? Because I feel like this relates, the more popular version is like the art side, where if I give it a picture and I ask it to recreate this in someone's style, it's just ripping on that person's style, and it's become this new thing. But there is like that name, image, likeness, property kind of concern on a different
totally,
side of like, well, can it just think my stuff faster, and it can write faster, and it can do all these things, and we will be obsolete? But can it ever get to doing that kind of critical thinking?
totally. So super fascinating topic and super highly debated.
Okay.
I feel like there's a number of different perspectives on this, like especially like the copyright side of things, right? Um, so there's a side that thinks, like, hey, as a content creator, you should basically be able to um, protect, your content. So if you're a songwriter or if you're an artist, like you should be able to protect your artwork, right? And then there's like the other side of the argument that says like, hey, whatever humans, do, or whatever's legal and illegal for humans, that should also be legal or illegal for AI, right? So you can think of this as um, like copyright laws for humans, right? If I take a book and I just straight up like, steal lines from the book and copy it verbatim into my own thing and claim it as my own, that's obviously, copyright issues or plagiarism. Um, but if I take a book and I read it and I digest the information and I come up with like novel takes or a summary of it, is that still plagiarism? Is that still copyright issues? No, because I'm not taking the lines line for line. So same with like a painting, right? Like if I took a work by Leonardo da Vinci and then, painted the exact same thing in that exact same style, that's like art forgery, right? But if I were to say, oh, I want to model a painting after Impressionists, or I want to model a painting after the style of Monet, like, is that plagiarism? Is that copyright?
Hmm.
Is that, fraud? I don't think so, right? Like that's how humans work. We are inspired by, some piece of text and then or some piece of artwork or some song, and then, we end up, modeling, future iterations off of it. Um, and so it's a super interesting concept, but like ultimately AI models like they obviously don't like have thoughts about these kind of things. So it's ultimately up to, the model developers to figure out like, hey, what's the best way for these models to respond in these kind of situations. And so there's going to be lots of legal battles probably to figure out
Hmm.
like what the actual approach is here. Um, but like going back to your concept of like, hey, if I put my essay into ChatGPT or any of these AI models or Grammarly and ask it to review it and provide me with feedback, like that is a valid concern. Like these models can use that. Um, if you don't have like the data sharing permissions turned off and add that basically to the model's knowledge base of things that it knows about, and then can, take insights from maybe an essay that you've written that are unique to you, but can like generate, potentially new insights based on connecting that with like other pieces of work,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely but it's not like the thing is like that's one document or one like piece of literature or artwork in a vast knowledge base of information that this model has. And so the more information, the more that becomes like a minor
Right.
element in the whole picture kind of thing, if that makes sense.
It feels like one of the issues is like thinking about, at least for me, the vast scale of what this really means, like the scale of data that it mines, the scale of the thinking that it does, and the depths to which it does it. Like my inability to understand the vastness of that makes me feel like a bigger player in it. Whereas in the same way, like if you look up at the stars and you're like, oh, there's a lot of stuff out there, and suddenly,
Totally.
how much do I matter? Is that an issue too of just because it feels so personal? Like I can open it up, I can ask it
Right.
questions, it will give me responses. Like it's just dealing with me and my requests, but it's
Right.
so much bigger and so much deeper than that. That how do we bridge, I guess, the personal side of it with the immensity of it?
Totally. So, I mean, the immensity of it, like, it is crazy to think about, right? Like, at this point, all the AI model developers have scraped like every single page that's on the internet. So, every single book that is available on the internet, every single website that's available, like every single page on the internet is already a part of its knowledge base. So, it's got like a crazy, crazy big, complex knowledge space. To the point where like in order to generate additional like data sets for the models, they're having models like generate things. So instead of just having like uh the Lord of the Rings, right? You're generating like text on maybe an essay saying like an AI model generating an essay on the impact of the Lord of the Rings on the human race, right? And then that adds, information to the knowledge base that's connected to these different concepts. So it's like the immensity of the, data is insane. The reason why you can have that, immense, underlying data set, but it still feels so personal is because like there's this thing called model context, which is basically it's maintaining information about the conversation that you're having with it and the information that you're providing for that conversation. And so it's able to take, the immensity of stuff that it has in the background, but
Hmm.
specify it to the context that it's looking at and working at with you. And
At the
so,
same
like, when
time as
you're
it's doing it to thousands of other people.
exactly, but your instance with it is unique, right? And so it
Hmm.
has like even like different chats that you have can be unique, right? Each one can be on a different subject and you could be asking it about, theoretical physics. Then you could open up a new chat and you could be asking it about, you know, uh, recipes for, bundt cakes, and it could have like specific information about the things that you like and all that kind of stuff. And now, these AI companies have developed this concept called memory. And really what that is it's just taking, like pieces of your conversation that you're having with this AI model and it's saving notes. So it's like, oh, Jordan is asking about AI and he's asking about, the Dead Sea Scrolls and he's asking about, blah blah blah. And then when you start to ask it questions in a new conversation, it's like, okay, well I know that he's also interested in these things, so maybe that can help, the model like generate content that's like more relevant to the things that he cares about.
Hmm.
So now instead of it just being like this big generic model that's given like zero inputs other than the question that you ask it, it's also getting like, oh, here are his interests, here are other conversations that he's had that are relevant, here are things that he likes and dislikes and stuff like that. And so then you're getting like way more personalized conversations, and the output of you asking a question to the model and me asking the exact same question to the model will be very different because there's an additional input to yours, which is,
Right.
interactions that you've had with the model previously.
So even though it's going to be pulling from the same data set, it can start to give in the same way everyone's algorithm can be very different. The comments you see on a thing can be very different. This can start to generate different responses. When it's thinking about
Exactly.
those data sets and the ones that are, scraped from human creations and the ones that are created by AI, does it distinguish between those when it's, if I'm asking it a question and it's looking over things and it says, well, I have an answer from humans and I have these modeled AI answers, does it look at all of them the same to then give me a thing? Or does it prioritize one over the other? Like, does it think it's smarter than humans or does it still defer to the humans?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know how that works specifically, so
Okay.
I'll have to say that that's out of my depth. Um, but basically, like everything has weights associated with it, and the way that those weights are associated are very technical, and there's lots of different like considerations that go into it. Um, but in the future, when the vast majority of content is going to be AI generated content, at some point they're going to become indistinguishable.
Right.
So I don't know what that looks like now. But like I, have no doubt that in the future, like the amount of things that are AI generated or, like AI assisted generated,
Hmm.
like you come up with an outline for something and some novel ideas and then it generates the filler. It generates like the book for you even though you have like specific things that you want to hit on and stuff like that. um yeah, the future is going to be that there is a lot more work that is generated by computers than there is by humans,
And
which
I
will
guess
be
because even
crazy.
within the question of like, well, which would it prioritize? If I used something like Grammarly or an AI assistant in writing, well, is it identifying it then as AI? How much weight does it give to the AI contribution to you? That gets messy too. If it's not just, a book that was written in the 1800s that it has a scan of that it's pulling from as we participate with it and it learns off of us. Oh my goodness. It just
Totally. No,
gets.
it gets super complicated, and the lines get blurry between us and the machine.
Well, I guess to walk away from some of the scary side of things, because I think that's like the doom side of everyone's brain, where, it's going to steal everything I know and my identity, and it's going to make all this stuff for me, and everything I consume will all be AI in the future. Is there a part of it that you are optimistic about going forward, like a value add that this does, or something that you are highly optimistic about the way AI fits, that should be something people balance with the fear? Maybe you can still hold some fear or concerns, yes, but that there can be optimism about it too?
Oh, totally. And to be like totally transparent, I am totally optimistic. So I might say these things like, oh, these are big things to be thinking about, but I am, highly optimistic that, like AI is very positive, and will have like a very positive impact on the future. So like I look at AI like, any technological advancement, um, as, it ends up like totally it ends up making humans extremely productive. And it might like change certain jobs or it might change certain fields. But ultimately, like the net positive of technological advancements are usually vastly outweigh like the negatives. And so I think that basically it'll allow humans to just create so much faster. It'll allow humans to iterate and, um, like adapt and learn so much faster. Like imagine, I don't know, like instead of going to an expert and, sitting down and spending time trying to figure out something and bounce ideas off, you can ask a AI bot and it has, the whole context of human history and knowledge, and it's able to provide you with like exact answers to all the questions and boil it down. And if you want like a more technical level of depth, it can give that to you. If you want like a more high level, explain it to me like I'm five, it can break it down in that way for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I think that it will make humanity like so productive and across so many fields, which is really exciting. Like I think the Industrial Revolution, right? Like it provided so many advancements in manufacturing and industrial base and all of that kind of stuff. Like AI will touch everything. Like AI will touch every single field, every single person. Like it doesn't matter, when it comes to even like the manual stuff, like manufacturing, like AI will be integrated into robots, and robots will get better at doing, manufacturing, which means humans can, take a step up and be in charge of, like thinking about, hey, how do I design this manufacturing plant better? And how do I, put those ideas in AI and bounce ideas off of AI? And then it helps me, make it better. So I just think that, I think that it will be overwhelmingly positive. And I think that it'll just make humanity so much more productive and, uh, like raise the standard of living. And, um, I don't know. I'm really excited about the future, I would say.
Well, I think I'll
I
leave
really love
people
this
there.
technology. Yeah.
I'll leave people there on a happy note. You should. There's a reason for optimism. Um, if you have concerns, I'd say, I don't know. I can't help you, but maybe you can go ask ChatGPT to give you some explanations on AI, ask it to explain itself to you. Matthew Cunningham, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us today. I think I understand AI slightly better. I know I understand it slightly better. I don't know that I really understand what I understand all that much, but I feel slightly better about it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed talking with you today.
Remember, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you find us. It helps us. Hopefully it helps you stay in touch with us until AI takes over all of your feeds and it gives you whatever you should be listening to. But for now, happy to have you here. For all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, until next time.